Welcome back to the Tuesday edition of the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast. Unlike the Friday edition, we're dedicating the Tuesday podcast to answering your garden questions. Stay tuned to find out how you can get your garden question into the program. So come on, let's do this. We get a rosemary propagation question from Debbie, who doesn't say where she's living. Folks, if you're going to email me to ask a question, please tell me where you're living, because all gardening is local. Anyway, Debbie says, I am attempting to propagate rosemary. I clipped the sprigs, stripped the lower leaves, and put the stems in potting soil, covered it with a white plastic garbage bag. I sprayed it with water every other day, but during the first week, I sprayed it daily. I'm about 4 weeks in, and now a few sprigs have mold. I've removed the moldy ones. I have the sprigs in a warm bedroom near a window that gets morning sun, but the opaque window covering is closed. I'm thinking I have two problems, says Debbie. She says, 1, too much water, and 2, the sprigs were not new growth. What are your thoughts on this? When would I see root growth normally? Well, Debbie, a lot of good questions. Let's try to find a rosemary propagator out here at the Fair Oaks Horticulture Center in the herb section. There is one here. It's Maria Schiffler, Sacramento County Master Gardener. Maria, rosemary propagation. You do it.
Yes, hi, Fred. Yes, thank you. Yes, I do a lot of rosemary propagation, actually. It's one of the easiest herbs to propagate. It's a woody perennial. But since I don't know what area you're in, I'm just going to kind of generalize this. In our Sacramento area, and I live in Elk Grove, I have the best success propagating rosemary in the fall, in the early fall, because it takes a long time for it to set roots, just like lavender. So what you're going to want to do is maybe hold off right now, unless you're feeling more comfortable about this. Hold off until the fall. It likes that cool weather. Our soil temperatures are still warm. You can actually propagate it directly in the soil at that point next to the mother plant. And what you're going to want to do is take some cuttings, maybe some semi-soft wood cuttings at that point. And since I don't know your area, of course, before it flowers or even after, take those same amount of cuttings that you're taking, the 2 to 3 inches, strip those leaves. You don't even need to use rooting hormone. And you just stick them in the dirt. And what I like to do is take about 5 or 6 and put them fairly close together so that you can see there's rosemary there. If you're not comfortable with doing that directly in your soil, get a 1-gallon pot and put about 4 or 5 in a circle into there. And you don't need to cover it. They don't need humidity to set roots. It actually causes them to rot. Try it that way during the fall. And even we have such mild winters going into winter, you can even do that, but it needs that long period of trying to set its roots. And you'll know when it sets roots when you see new growth, or you can do the little tug test where you tug at the tip of it, and if there's any kind of resistance, but not a slight resistance, but a good resistance, then you know it has set roots.
And that could take months.
Yes, and that's why fall is best, so it's ready to plant in the ground in spring.
All right, I have questions for you now based on that answer. Now, you talked about possibly growing it in containers, getting it started in containers, much like what Debbie has done. What sort of soil would you put in that container to propagate a rosemary plant?
For the rosemary plant, you can just use a potting mix that's kind of like a little bit chunky and barky, maybe a little bit of your native soil within it, but nothing light, nothing too fluffy. It really needs to set its roots in something a bit more dense and thick. And you won't even need to water it as much because we'll get all that fall rain, the winter rain. Of course, make sure it doesn't dry out.
But of course, if you've got that container indoors, it's only going to get rainwater. If you've got a bad roof, and I would suggest you spend your money on a roofer to do that. But if the pot is indoors, what sort of environment would it like indoors?
Cool.
Cool, like groovy?
Cool, like groovy. Cool as in not too warm and not hot and not in front of a direct light of the window.
All right, so just not in darkness, though.
No, not in darkness.
Okay. Now, and watering, I guess be careful so you don't overwater.
Yeah, and what you could do if it's in a pot, stick it in some kind of a container where you can put about 1 inch or 2 of water and let that soak up from the bottom bottom for about 5 to 10 minutes.
What about bottom heat? Would you use like a propagation mat?
Nope. No, I would not.
All right. What about a rooting hormone? Would you use something like seaweed or something like that?
You could. It's not absolutely necessary.
All right. When you make the cutting on a rosemary to plant, how long should that cutting be?
I take my cuttings, I'll just go and clip in the garden and maybe take like a 4 or 5 inch cutting. So then and put it directly in water at that point so it doesn't lose any moisture. And then about a 2 to 3 inch cutting when you're ready to actually make the cut and put it in the soil. Strip the bottom leaves. And when you plant it, it's best to have at least 2 nodes in the soil.
Oh, okay. That's good to know. When you make the cutting, then are you using one that has flower buds on it or not, or one that had already flowered? And can you use tip cuttings, or should you go for that middle wood, that semi-hardwood?
I would go for the semi-hardwood because you have a little bit soft, but you don't have like completely hard. And the other part of your question about the flowering, it does depend on the time that your rosemary flowers in your garden during either the fall or winter when it's the best time to propagate. But you don't want it to have any flowers. If it does, just cut those off. And you could still try to propagate it that way. It might take even longer because it didn't complete its flowering cycle.
When you're putting in that sprig to root, are you trimming the leaves off the part that's going to be underground, or are you leaving those leaves on?
The part that's going to be in the soil or in the ground, you're going to want to strip those leaves off. And what I tend to do is leave about maybe an inch and a half of the soft leaves, the leaves on the top of it, because all the energy you want to be focused in growing the roots and not sustaining the leaves or any flowers or anything like that.
And I would think that the time of day is important too when you're taking these cuttings. What is the best time of day to do that?
The best time of day is in the morning, after if there's dew on the plants after the dew has evaporated away, or early in the evening.
When it's cooler. So basically you're avoiding the hot afternoon sun.
Yes.
Any final thoughts?
Final thoughts would be don't give up, because rosemary is a wonderful plant and it is easy to grow when it wants to grow. So just find the best timing to do that.
And do a lot of it too, so that way you'll have some success.
Right. And it does not need humidity.
Okay, so she doesn't need the white plastic bags.
No, she does not.
We're making it easy for you, Debbie. Maria Schiffler, Sacramento County Master Gardener. Thanks for the rosemary advice.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you, Fred.
From the garden email bag, Diane writes in and asks, I want to plant one freestone peach tree to use for eating and pie making. Can you recommend a top flavorful one for me to purchase? Well, we need to define a few peach terms here. Peaches are either clingstone, the fruit clings to the pit in the center, or freestone, the fruit comes away easily from the pit. Generally, clingstone peaches are used for canning, while freestones are fresh market peaches for eating and baking. Most varieties mentioned here are self-fruitful. You won't need a second variety nearby for pollination. For decades, Dave Wilson Nursery of California conducted thorough taste tests with industry professionals to determine the answer to your question, Diane. Each trial usually involved more than 20 peach varieties, and as you might expect, the most flavorful variety depends on the individual taste buds. And we're going to be talking about chill hours in this little discussion. A chill hour is any hour between November and February that is between 32 and 45 degrees. Stone fruit trees require chill hours during the winter for maximum production the following spring and summer. So here are those top scoring peach varieties over the years. Harkin, which is a very high-rated yellow peach, hails from Canada, with red skin and yellow flesh, described as sweet and flavorful. This tree requires about 800 chill hours during the winter for maximum production. The O. Henry, it's a popular fresh market yellow freestone peach noted for its large size, firm, full red skin, and superb flavor. The O. Henry is a strong, vigorous, heavy-bearing tree, and that needs about 750 chill hours per year. The Loring, Loring, it's a taste test winner featuring a large size, excellent flavor and texture. It's also a low acid variety. It's rated as excellent for growing in the home orchard. It too needs chill hours, totaling about 750. The 49er is considered a dessert peach. It's a large yellow freestone. It needs 700 chill hours. Eva's Pride. Now, there's one for USDA Zone 9. It's a freestone peach. It's a low chill peach variety. It only needs about 100 to 200 chill hours. The flavor is rated as fine or delicious. Harvest time is a bit earlier, June or July, than many other peach varieties. There's June Pride, and one tasting judge wrote perhaps the best flavored peach for its harvest season around July 1st. It too has lesser chill hours than many of the other varieties at only 500 chill hours. One very popular peach variety that got a lot of votes was Kawea, K-A-W-E-A-H, Kawea. It's an all-purpose favorite among late summer freestone peaches with a good balance of sugar to acid, good for eating, baking, canning, jams, and jellies. And it, too, doesn't need that many chill hours, 500 chill hours. And when you talk to the professionals at Dave Wilson Nursery, they're all Kawea fans. They have their own personal favorites as well. Phil Purcell likes Oktoberfest, which ripens in early fall and requires 500 to 700 chill hours. Ed Livo, independent fruit expert, really likes that O. Henry we talked about, but he also likes the Indian-free white freestone peach, which needs about 700 chill hours. He says the white-red flesh make for great pie filling and jam, plus it's great for drying. And the Indian-free has the highest test scores as well, but it is the one that does need another peach or nectarine tree nearby of a different variety for pollination. Dave Wilson's Tom Spellman concurs with the choice of Kawea, and he actually is very Solomon-like in his discussion of what tree to get if you can't make up your mind. He says, instead of choosing a single flavorful peach, maybe purchase a multi-budded selection. That would make more sense. That's good advice. We get questions here on the Garden Basics podcast. Tanya writes in and says, I have 3 raised beds. I planted a cover crop in one of them last fall. I was going to crimp the cover crop to slow the release of nitrogen, and I'm wondering if I can just do this by hand in my raised bed, just sort of crimp them and then work them in. Is this idea crazy? Well, actually, late winter, if you've got a cover crop, is the perfect time to do something to make sure the nitrogen stays in the soil and doesn't escape. In fact, here at the Fair Oaks Horticulture Center on this Saturday in March, I'm witnessing Master Gardener Gail Pothauer cutting up the fava bean cover crop here and just basically tossing it on the ground. And you're doing it, and the flowers of the plant, Gail, have just barely started opening.
Right. We like to cut down the cover crop as it's flowering. If you let it continue to grow and those flowers get pollinated and the bean starts to develop, then that is taking some of that nitrogen into the development of that bean. So we want to cut down the cover crop just as it's flowering so we get it at its most nitrogen nutritious state.
And what you're doing here is you're cutting off about 6 inches at a time and literally just tossing it beneath the plant. Now, once you get all these plants down, cut up into itty-bitty pieces, what will you do then?
Well, it depends. This bed is pretty crowded with fava beans, and it will probably be too much green material for this one bed. So we will cut it up in small pieces and place it into other beds that didn't have any cover crop, and we'll turn it under and it becomes organic matter. If we have too much still, we could give it over to the compost folks and they can put it in their compost pile.
Or their worm bins.
Or their worm bin, yeah. They need to have organic matter for both the compost and the vermicomposting. But yeah, we could also just leave it on the soil and act as a mulch. But what we typically do is we'll cut it into small pieces and turn it under and let it start decomposing. And about 4 to 6 weeks later, then we could plant.
I recall one master gardener saying that after you cut down a cover crop, you want to cover it with mulch or something like that just to help stop the nitrogen from escaping into the air.
Right, because the nitrogen can volatilize into the air. So either turn it under right away or, yes, go ahead and cover it. it. That way you keep the nitrogen there. And then plus we have fava beans, which are a legume. And hopefully they have nitrogen-fixing nodules on their roots. And so you can leave those roots in the soil as well, and they can be used by the next crop that you grow.
Easy peasy. And peas are a legume, too.
Yes, true.
But yeah, that's the unfortunate part of cover crops. They can produce flowers, and in the case of fava beans, some edible beans. But it doesn't do your soil any good. If your goal with a cover crop is to feed the soil, you got to feed it before it fully flowers, and then you want to chop it into pieces. Now, as far as crimping goes, if you just took an entire stem and just bent it over, yeah, I guess you could, but I think it would take longer to break down, because like you're doing, chopping it into little 6-inch pieces, it's going to break down and feed the soil a lot quicker.
Right, and fava beans are they have a pretty hefty stalk. It's kind of a square stalk. It's hollow, but there's a lot of bulk there. And so it takes a while for it to decompose. And so that's why we're cutting it in small pieces. Yeah, and the crimping, I'm not familiar with the term crimping of a cover crop. So if it means just bending it over, you still would need at some point to come back and cut it down, I would think. I don't know.
That's right. But cutting it, put those pruners to work, and you can be feeding your soil at very low cost. Gail Pothauer, Master Gardener, Sacramento County, here at the Fair Oaks Horticulture Center, cover cropping away. Thank you, Gail. Here's a bit more information about crimping a cover crop. It's called roller crimping in the Midwest and back east on big farms. Roller crimping cover crops has been utilized as a way to terminate cover crops, and they've been doing it for many years. Roller crimping offers a viable option to managing cover crops in a no-till cropping system. The cover crop is rolled and crimped when the plants have reached maturity. The mature plant is flattened to the soil surface and its stems are crimped. The crimping action helps crush the walls of the stem to facilitate drying down of the plant. Now, this is a big machine. There are several different types of roller crimpers available. There are units that mount on the front of the tractor, the rear of the tractor, or even on the planting unit itself. The benefits of incorporating roller crimping onto a farm: well, first, the use of a roller crimper program helps to leave biomass on the soil surface, and that drastically reduces risk of soil erosion and helps preserve soil moisture during the summer. The biomass on the soil surface will also keep the soil cooler during the summer. It reduces evaporation and heat stress on the cash crop. Rolling down high biomass cover crops also provides an excellent way to work towards improving soil health. The use of the roller crimper will also suppress weeds early in the growing season. But there are several considerations when implementing roller crimping technology on the farm. And remember, we're talking farms here, not gardens, where you may be thinking of crimping by hand. First is increased pest pressure. In Vermont, slugs and armyworm infestations are more prevalent on fields with more biomass. Field scouting is also a must with roller crimping. Second, there is a greater risk of lower final stand populations due to planting row crops into a heavy mat of biomass. And proper planting depth must also be maintained. The operator has to be sure the seed is placed at the correct depth to account for that biomass on top of the soil surface. So if you have a farm, not a garden, then investing in roller crimping equipment might make sense. But for the backyard gardener, you just might be better off mowing or weed trimming or chopping by hand your cover crop into small pieces and incorporating that into the soil or covering with a mulch. This information comes courtesy of the University of Vermont Extension Service. John writes in and asks, I currently have a couple dozen blueberry plants in 1-gallon containers. I started a couple of years ago from cuttings. I eventually want to move them up to 15-gallon containers. What size container should I use to migrate up to that 15-gallon size? Well, the fewer times you have to migrate your blueberry cuttings, the better, John. For one thing, take a look at the roots in those 1-gallon containers. They may be wrapping around the root ball or coming out the bottom. If that is the case, Put them right into 15-gallon containers. As long as the 15s have good drainage and your acid soil mix is easy draining, there's nothing wrong with moving them into 15s now. But let's say the roots in those 1-gallon containers aren't entangled too much. You could move them up to 5-gallon containers if you're planning on giving a few away to friends, or 10-gallon containers if you're going to keep them for yourself. But I would only have one per container. If you have multiples in one container, you do want to give them each their own container. Another option you may want to consider is planting them in cattle troughs, watering troughs, livestock watering troughs. Nowadays, you can find them in many places besides the farm supply stores. They're usually about 6 feet long and about 2.5 feet wide and about 36 inches tall. That's a good size for holding 2 blueberry plants. So you could take those cuttings and just plunk them right into a good acid soil mix in those watering troughs and save yourself the trouble of doing all that transplanting. So what is a good soil mix for blueberries? Well, they do like a pH that's on the low side, around 5.5. So something that's a rather acidic mix. Use a 1/3 mix of potting soil intended for camellias and azaleas, 1/3 peat moss or quaw, that's coconut fibers, and small pathway bark, and maybe a handful of soil sulfur. This will give those blueberries that ideal pH growing range around 5.5. Want to leave us a garden question? You'll find a link at gardenbasics.net. Also, when you click on any episode at gardenbasics.net, you're going to find a link to SpeakPipe. You'll find it in the show notes. And when you bring up SpeakPipe on your computer or smartphone, you can leave us an audio question without making a phone call. Or you can go to SpeakPipe directly. That's speakpipe.com/gardenbasics. You want to call or text us? We have that number posted at gardenbasics.net. It's 916-292-8964, 916-292-8964. Email? Sure, we like email. Send it along with your pictures to fred@farmerfred.com. Or again, go to gardenbasics.net and get that link. And if you send us a question, be sure to tell us where you're gardening, because all gardening is local. Find it all at gardenbasics.net. Garden Basics with Farmer Fred comes out every Tuesday and Friday, and it's brought to you by Smart Pots and Dave Wilson Nursery. Garden Basics, it's available wherever podcasts are handed out. For more information about the podcast, visit our website, gardenbasics.net, and that's where you can find out about the free Garden Basics newsletter, Beyond the Basics. And thank you so much for listening.